Star Trek vs. Star Wars. The Beginning by Darius Trent. Chapter 5. New friends. Ensign Hawk stood outside the door to the medical bay. She had been ordered by Captain Trent to escort the female who had been identified as Princess Leia Organa to her diplomatic guest quarters. Normally Hawk would be playing pool down in the recreation room with the rest of the bridge crew, but for the past 7 hours she had been running around trying to manage the 1,000 people on this ship to fix both the Arizona and the newly identified Tantive IV. She started to think back to how she managed to get such a high-ranking position on a starship, and how she ended up in the position she was in. Her parents were both on the USS Melbourne when it was reassigned to combat the Borg at Wolf 359. The Melbourne was destroyed by the Borg with all hands, leaving her 10-year-old self and her 12-year-old brother Sean orphans. They lived with their grandparents for a while before her brother attended Starfleet Academy, with her following suit 4 years after. It was then that the Borg's second incursion occurred, but this time the Borg came with a plan B. They sent a ship back in time to assimilate Earth in its infancy. The Enterprise E, being caught in the wake of the temporal vortex, went back in time with the Borg ship to stop it from assimilating Earth. They succeeded in destroying the Borg ship, but not before the Borg began assimilating the Enterprise itself, assimilating nearly half the crew before they were stopped. Among that half was Lieutenant Sean Hawk, who was assimilated attempting to stop the Borg from contacting the Borg of that era. After that incident, Sabrina went on a downward spiral, repeatedly showing up to class drunk or unprepared and nearly failing her 3rd year at the academy. It was Captain Trent, posted at Starfleet Command before taking the Arizona, who helped her out of that state, encouraging her to get back in shape and succeed near the top of her class, promising her a chance on one of the most prominent classes of ship that Starfleet fielded. A few years after the Dominion War, Sabrina, who had been promoted to lieutenant following the war, was selected by Trent as the head of operations on the Arizona, fulfilling the promise he made her. Although the Arizona has been bogged down with minor work better suited to older Miranda and Constellation-class starships, she enjoyed being a senior officer on a Galaxy-class ship, and considered Trent and Aldrin as parental figures, guiding her where her parents couldn't. A combadge chirp snapped her out of thought. Trent to Hawk came through the small locator communicator device on the left side of her chest. She immediately tapped it and replied, "Hawk here. Our guest is awake and is about to go to her quarters," revealed Trent. "I want you to escort her there." "Aye, sir," answered Hawk. "And Sabrina," added Trent. "Try and create some small talk with her. We want her as an ally so we can figure out the best solution to this issue." "Yes, Captain," replied Hawk. "I won't let you down." "Good to know." Trent out, ended Trent as the communicator signaled the termination of the connection between the two of them. Hawk straightened her uniform out, preparing herself to take this woman to her guest quarters on Deck 7. She eagerly awaited her arrival, in an attempt to try to exhibit Starfleet's values in front of a new culture. Almost automatically, the doors to the medical bay opened up to reveal a human woman, dressed in Federation sickbay clothes and looking slightly disappointed about her predicament. "Hi there. I'm Lieutenant Hawk, head of operations on the USS Arizona," rightly welcomed Hawk. "I'm here to escort you to your quarters." "Good," answered the woman. "I'm Princess Leia Organa of Organa." "Nice to meet you, Leia. If you'll follow me?" asked Hawk. "Will do," replied Leia. They both walked together, with Hawk being especially bright. "So what sort of ship is this?" asked Leia. "The color's sort of beige-ish here." "This ship is a Galaxy class, one of the largest ships Starfleet fields," replied Hawk. "The corridors were designed to have civilians in them, but the Dominion War meant that they had to leave." "These ships can have children on them?" surprisedly asked Leia. "Yes, they can," answered Hawk. "Before the war these ships were described as cities in space." "Huh," commented Leia. "And what did they actually do?" "Before the war Starfleet only had 6 Galaxy-class ships, and they were sent to the frontier of space," continued Hawk. "Now I believe there's upward of about 50 odd in the fleet all serving various roles, although some of them actually aren't completed. The war forced us to rush ships to the front line. Is that so? Questioned Leia. How many ships are there actually in this Federation of yours? Starfleet maintains and registers about 3,000 starships across the Alpha and Beta quadrants, explained Hawk. They're mostly spread out, so it's hard to scrap a last-minute fleet together. But in the war we had fleets numbering in the thousands fighting. What about your universe? I can assume it's safe to talk about the Empire and our rebellion, asked Leia. Oh yes, go ahead, answered Hawk. Well, in my universe ships don't have this sort of homey look to them, started Leia. The Galactic Empire, the people who use that ship you just fought possess about 20,000 more of those, and they're spread out across the galaxy, each supervising one sector. You rarely see them gathering together. Sounds like our Constitution classes back in the 23rd century, analogized Hawk. Sorry, I know you probably don't understand the analogy. The Constitution class starship was a ship in the 23rd century that was the top line of ship at the time. They were the most prestigious vessel someone could serve on, and were often sent deep into uncharted space. They rarely ever met, though. I think there are a few still in service today. Well, for a start the analogy's kinda off, replied Leia. The ships that the Empire use have never been designed for exploration in particular, because the majority of the galaxy has already been charted. Really? Questioned Hawk. We've only managed to chart around 1/4 of our galaxy. And the duo continued talking through the corridor. On the Tantive IV, repair crews were busy replicating spare parts, figuring out alien technology and attempting to connect with the new crew. Amongst this, Chief Engineer Tapon and R2-D2 were busy working on the ship's ion reactor, with Tapon following basic Starfleet protocol on the handling of ion reactors. And so you say that your ship doesn't use an ion reactor? Questioned R2, the universal translator turning his voice from a series of beeps and whistles into a language Tapon could understand. That is correct, answered Tapon. The Arizona uses a matter-antimatter reaction assembly to power propulsion and other vital systems, like almost all ships in this area of the galaxy. Interesting, commented R2. And what about the massive blue and red pods at the rear of your ships? Those are the warp nacelles, our method of faster-than-light travel, replied Tapon. The nacelles physically bend space, allowing us to relatively travel faster than light without breaking the laws of physics. That sounds very simple compared to our form of propulsion, commented R2. Our FTL systems involve pushing the ship into a completely separate dimension of space, called hyperspace, where we can then travel faster than light. Fascinating, Tapon replied with bewilderment. Such a method of propulsion is hypothetical, yet it is possible. At what speed is a ship known to travel at in this hyperspace? A hyperspace journey is known to take hours due to having to maneuver out of the way of objects, answered R2. In hyperspace, every real object casts a mass shadow in hyperspace. Therefore, a small asteroid in the path of a vessel in hyperspace is enough to destroy the vessel. There are specific routes for hyperspace travelers which are usually void of dangerous objects, although a journey in hyperspace is never in a straight line. Your description of hyperspace sounds like what we call subspace, commented Tapon. We only use subspace for communications purposes, though, and a message sent in subspace is a lot slower than what you describe a hyperspace journey to be. But if our hyperspace is similar to your subspace, proposed R2, then wouldn't we be able to modify a subspace transceiver on one of your ships to be able to detect vessels in hyperspace? You may be onto something, R2, replied Tapon. I will present this to the captain as soon as repairs to this reactor are completed. Oh, don't worry about the repairs, said R2. I've got everything under control here. You can go and work on the hyperspace scanner. Thank you, R2, thanked Tapon. I will endeavor to work quickly so we can resolve this conflict immediately. Tapon got up from the crouched position he was in next to R2, and walked towards the cargo bay, which had been selected as a temporary beam in sight for the Arizona's crew and equipment. He tapped on his comm badge, signaling the Arizona for transport, before being claimed by a blue light, turning his body into a complex geometric equation and making him appear to fade away into nothingness. On the edge of the system, space was as quiet as it usually was. No sound could be heard, as the vacuum of space prevents the travel of sound. But no matter what properties space possessed, it wasn't enough to stop the 5-star destroyers now slowly moving together in line. In the middle of these destroyers was the Devastator. Still scarred from its battle with the Arizona, the Devastator now had one temporary shield dome in place of the destroyed port shield dome, and the hull was slowly being patched in the areas where there had been hull breaches. The ship had already picked up the TIE fighters laying scattered around the area it had fought the Arizona, and was now in the process of scanning the system and the surrounding space for hyperspace routes. On the bridge of the Devastator, Darth Vader stood by the scanner console, awaiting reports from the probes it had sent out earlier. The ship itself had already managed to gather that the system it was in was definitely not in the galaxy it was familiar with. It was possible that the Devastator had found itself deep in the unknown regions of the galaxy, but even predictions made by Imperial scientists of the star layout beyond were greatly inaccurate, dumbfounding the limited scientists aboard the Devastator. "My lord, we can now receive transmissions through the anomaly," reported Kerala, who had just walked back onto the bridge after spending a few hours in engineering overseeing the repairs. "The Emperor would like a word with you." "Patch it through to my chambers. I'll rejoin you once it is complete," replied Vader. "Yes, my lord," answered Kerala. He immediately walked to the communications officer to make the necessary arrangements, while Vader walked out of the bridge to deal with the Emperor. Minutes later, Vader was sitting in his giant sleeping pod, similar to the one he had on the Superstar Destroyer Executor. In front of him, the giant holographic head of Emperor Palpatine flickered in front of him, the bluish hue of the transmission giving the Emperor a calming but chilly feeling to be talking to. "Lord Vader," greeted Palpatine. "Emperor," responded Vader. "I can feel a great disturbance in the Force, my apprentice," stated Palpatine. "Something has occurred that should not have." "I feel it too," replied Vader. "I felt it as soon as the Tantive disappeared into that anomaly. Regarding of which, your mission parameters have changed," continued Palpatine. "The ship you call the Arizona has many capabilities that the Empire could put to great use. Not only are you to destroy the Tantive IV now, but you are also to capture the Arizona by any means necessary." "Understood, my Emperor," answered Vader. "I will not disappoint you." "Very well then," ended Palpatine. He closed the channel as the holographic image faded from sight, leaving the gray textured wall behind it. "My lord, we found something interesting," Kerala said through Vader's personal intercom. "I'll be up there in a minute," Vader replied. He got out of his pod and headed out of the door. "You said you found something?" asked Vader to Kerala as he walked on the bridge. "Yes, we did," Kerala replied with an insidious attitude. "Look over here." He gestured towards the small screen next to the probe control console. On the screen was a live feed of the droid which had been sent to map out the only planet in the system. It displayed the image of the USS Arizona, alongside two other smaller vessels of probably the same origin. One had a catamaran-style shaped turret and had the name USS Galway on the hull. The other was evidently of an older design era and had the name USS Crazy Horse on the hull. Beside there was a small blockade runner, evidently the Tantive IV. "That's them," Vader exclaimed. "Have the necessary hyperspace routes been mapped yet?" "Not yet," answered Kerala. "That probe took a rather irregular path to get to the planet. It'll take probably half an hour for the computer to estimate a hyperspace route we can take." "Very well then," replied Vader. "Do everything you can to keep that probe hidden, Commander. I want to keep the element of surprise on our side." "Yes, my lord," replied Kerala. "It will be done." "Good," ended Vader. He walked off the bridge, wheezing in his usual manner as he did so. And as the event finished, the Star Destroyers all stopped in space. On the Devastator, crews ran around attempting to plot the best hyperspace route for the ships to take. The Hunter had found its prey, and now lay stalking it.